My parents always favored my sister, but when she discovered I had $15 million, she completely lost it at Thanksgiving dinner. My dad couldn't even get a word out. Can you imagine the look on your family's faces when they realize the underachieving son they've ignored for decades just sold his company for $15 million? Because that's exactly what happened this past Thanksgiving. And believe me, the fallout was more spectacular than any movie scene. Before I dive into how it all went down, seriously, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the forgotten child in your own family. So for 32 years, I've been Buddy, the invisible son. My sister, Grace, she was the golden child, bathed in my parents' adoration. Me? I was quietly building a tech company that eventually sold for a cool $15 million. Nobody in my family knew. Not a soul. Until last Thanksgiving. And when that truth slipped out during dinner, it was like a bomb went off. My sister started screaming, my dad nearly choked on his turkey, and decades of messed up family dynamics just imploded right there at the dinner table. Growing up in suburban Chicago, my childhood looked picture-perfect on the outside. White picket fence, basketball hoop, a golden retriever named Max. But inside our house on Maple Street, there was always this unspoken pecking order. Grace, my sister, she was 3 years older, and, well, she was the star. She was born with all the talents my educator parents valued. Mozart on the piano by 7, spelling bee champion, straight A student, 4.0 GPA. Her room was practically a shrine to her excellence, covered in ribbons and trophies. My room? Sports posters and computer parts. Not that anyone really saw it, because they rarely stepped inside. Buddy, come see Grace's science fair project. She made a working model of the solar system. Mom would call, her voice practically bursting with pride. I'd trudge downstairs to another cake, more photos, and calls to grandparents celebrating Grace's latest triumph. When I brought home a first-place trophy from a soccer tournament, Mom just glanced at it. That's nice, honey. Put it in your room. Dad didn't even look up from his papers. That trophy ended up shoved in my closet. What was the point of displaying it when no one cared? Birthdays? Oh, they were a stark reminder. Grace's were these elaborate, themed extravaganzas, custom cakes, 20 guests, weeks of planning. For me, Mom would grab a grocery store cake the day of, and we'd have a quiet family dinner. Some years, they were so wrapped up in Grace's activities that my birthday became an afterthought. We'll celebrate this weekend, buddy. Grace has her piano recital today, and you know how important that is, Dad would say, totally oblivious to the disappointment in my eyes. Even the little things. Grace got new clothes every school year. I got hand-me-downs from the neighbor kid. Her academic achievements were meticulously tracked on a calendar on the fridge. My soccer schedule never made it up there. When Grace was in the school play, both parents took the day off work to attend every performance. But when my soccer team made it to the state championship, Mom said, Dad will try to make it if his faculty meeting ends early. He didn't. I scored the winning goal, and no one from my family was there to see it. Why can't you be more like your sister? That question became the soundtrack of my childhood. Mom would sigh it when I'd rather code than practice an instrument. Dad would mutter it when my report card showed BS instead of ass. By the time Grace was applying to colleges, our dynamic was etched in stone. Dinner table conversations revolved around her Ivy League applications. Parents hired consultants, essay coaches, test prep tutors. Harvard or Yale would be ideal, but we'd settle for Princeton. Mom would say, Dad nodding along. When I mentioned wanting to study computer science, Dad just waved his hand. Those video games won't get you anywhere, buddy. You should consider law or medicine, though I'm not sure you have the grades for it. They never even noticed that my playing around on computers was me teaching myself to code, building websites for local businesses, soaking up emerging tech. By 16, my weekend hobby was making more money than my summer job, but I kept it to myself. I'd learned early on that sharing my accomplishments only led to them being minimized or ignored. High school was more of the same. Grace was valedictorian, gave this amazing speech at graduation, got a huge scholarship to Yale. Parents threw her a massive party. 2 years later, I graduated in the top 15% of my class. Mom remembered to take photos, but no party. Dad just patted my shoulder. Not bad, son. Not Grace level, but not bad. That night, sitting alone in my room, looking at college brochures, I made a decision that changed everything. I would stop seeking approval I'd never get. I would build my own path, on my terms, free from their comparisons. I had no idea how drastically that decision would shape my future. College was another stark contrast. Grace got personalized tours of elite universities, intensive SAT prep, her own application headquarters. My college prep? One counselor meeting and a stack of state university brochures. We've used most of our college fund for Grace's Yale education, Mom explained when I brought up my plans. Yale isn't cheap, and she might go to medical school. You can apply for scholarships and loans like other students. So, I ended up at Illinois State on a partial scholarship, working 20 hours a week at campus tech support to cover the rest. My dorm room was small, shabby, cinder blocks. But for the first time, I felt free. Free from the constant comparisons to Grace. During freshman orientation, I met Professor Lawrence Jenkins. Balding, tweed jacket, wire-rimmed glasses. He saw me fixing another student's laptop. "That's some impressive troubleshooting," he said. "You clearly know your way around computer systems." In Professor Jenkins, I found what I'd always lacked, a mentor who truly valued my specific talents. He invited me to his advanced programming seminar, offered me independent study. "You have a natural talent for seeing both the technical details and the big-picture business applications," he told me. "That's rare, buddy. Most people excel at one or the other." While my parents rarely called, except to share Grace's latest achievements at Yale, I was thriving. Sophomore year, I built a scheduling and inventory system for small businesses, solving problems the big software companies ignored. 3 restaurants and a hardware store in town paid me to implement it. Real income, real experience. By junior year, I had my first moderately successful app, helping small businesses manage customer relationships. It generated enough revenue that I could quit my campus job and focus on development. When I called home to share the news, Mom sounded distracted. "That's nice, honey. Did I tell you Grace got engaged? Marcus is a 4th-year medical student at Yale. Their wedding will be next summer. We're so excited." My coding success never came up again. The engagement dominated our rare calls for months. Marcus came from old Boston money. The wedding would be lavish. My work was, as usual, irrelevant. Senior year, I faced a huge decision. Major tech companies offered me impressive starting positions, substantial salaries. But I had a different vision. I wanted to expand my customer relationship software into a comprehensive business solution, focusing on security for financial transactions. I saw a massive market opportunity. When I mentioned turning down the corporate offers to start my own company during a rare visit home, my parents exchanged concerned glances. "Is that really wise?" Dad asked, frowning. "Those are guaranteed positions. Starting a business is risky." Mom patted my hand. "Honey, not everyone can be exceptional like Grace. There's nothing wrong with a steady job. They just didn't get it." I wasn't trying to compete with Grace. I was creating something entirely different, something that aligned with my strengths. After graduation, while my family was preoccupied with Grace and Marcus's wedding, I moved to Silicon Valley with $12,000, my life savings, and a prototype of my security software. Rented a tiny studio in a questionable neighborhood. Every waking hour was spent refining my product, pitching to investors. My parents called occasionally, usually to relay news about Grace's hospital position or her new house in Boston. They never asked about my work. I kept my responses vague, not out of spite, but because I'd learned they weren't truly interested. "How's California?" Mom would ask. "Fine," I'd reply. "Sunny. That's nice. Did we tell you Grace and Marcus are thinking about starting a family? I could be a grandmother soon." And so the pattern continued, an entire continent separating us physically and emotionally. But for the first time, I was grateful for that distance. Grateful for the freedom to build something of my own, without the shadow of comparison. The early days of my startup were brutal. My studio apartment became my office. Mattress shoved against a wall, 3 monitors dominating the space. 100-hour weeks. Ramen and coffee. Coding until my eyes blurred. My company, Secure Transact, focused on enhanced security protocols for financial institutions battling online fraud. I'd identified a huge gap. Existing software was either too clunky or too simplistic. The first year was a constant hustle. Tech meetups, pitch nights, cold calls to banks. Most doors stayed closed. But slowly, through sheer persistence and the strength of my prototype, I secured meetings. My first real team formed organically. Alicia, a brilliant security expert fed up with corporate bureaucracy. Ryan, a front-end developer who made complex features user-friendly. Jasmine, who handled business operations with incredible efficiency. We worked out of a converted warehouse in Oakland. San Francisco was too expensive. Questionable heating, leaky roof, next to a metal shop and a pickle company. But it was ours. And within those walls, we were building something revolutionary. Just as we were gaining traction, disaster struck. CyberShield, a major competitor backed by venture capital, announced a security suite suspiciously similar to ours. A week later, we discovered one of our early contract developers had stolen our code and sold it to them. The legal battle nearly destroyed us before we'd even truly begun. Legal fees drained our minimal capital. The stress was overwhelming. For 3 months, I slept on a cot in the office, showered at a nearby gym, working around the clock to keep the company afloat while fighting the lawsuit. During this time, Grace called to share news. She and Marcus bought a 5-bedroom colonial in an exclusive Boston suburb. Mom and Dad helped with the down payment, of course. They're so supportive. How's your computer thing going? I didn't mention the lawsuit or that I was living in my office. It's coming along, was all I said. The turning point came unexpectedly. The legal battle had garnered some industry attention. A senior vice president from First Western Bank reached out. He'd reviewed our protocols, impressed by our innovative approach. We've been following your case, he said. What CyberShield did was unethical. Their implementation of your ideas is flawed. We'd like to work with the original inventors. First Western became our first major client. Their successful deployment led to case studies, industry articles, and, crucially, more clients. Within 6 months, we had contracts with 8 regional banks, negotiations with 2 national institutions. Our team grew from 5 to 50, then to over 200. We moved from the leaky warehouse to proper offices in San Francisco's financial district. I finally upgraded from my studio to a modest 1-bedroom condo, though I barely spent any time there. As Secure Transact's reputation grew, so did interest from larger tech companies. The first offer came 3 years in, $7 million from a mid-sized financial software provider. I declined, knowing our trajectory. A year later, offers had doubled. Investment bankers started calling, suggesting it was time to cash out. But I stayed focused on building. Finally, 5 years after starting with nothing but a prototype and pure determination, an offer came that made sense. Tech giant, one of the world's largest companies, offered $15 million for Secure Transact. They wanted our technology, our clients, our team. Most importantly, they shared our vision. After extensive discussions, I accepted. At 31, I became a multimillionaire overnight. Throughout all this, my family remained largely unaware. During our infrequent calls, they continued to focus on Grace's achievements. Her promotion to head of cardiology, the vacation home she and Marcus bought in Vermont, their kids' private preschool. When Mom mentioned they'd helped Grace and Marcus with a kitchen renovation, I felt a momentary urge to tell them about the acquisition. Instead, I just listened to the detailed description of Grace's new marble countertops and Viking range. I kept living modestly, upgraded to a comfortable, not extravagant, condo, invested most of the money, donated to educational programs for young people in tech. The only luxury I allowed myself was occasional travel. My parents still introduced me to their friends as our son who works with computers in California, while Grace remained our brilliant daughter, the cardiologist. I had made peace with this dynamic. I'd built a fulfilling life with friends who valued me and colleagues who respected my contributions. Then came the Thanksgiving invitation. An email, formal, impersonal, from Grace and Marcus. My first instinct was to decline. I'd spent the last 3 Thanksgivings with friends, relaxed, free from family tension. But something made me hesitate. Curiosity, maybe, or some lingering hope for connection. Before I could decide, my phone rang. It was Grace. "Did you get my email?" she asked, no preamble. "Mom and Dad are coming, but I told them you probably wouldn't make it, since you never seem to have time for family." That familiar sting of accusation. "Actually," I heard myself say, "I can make it this year." A brief silence. "Oh, well, that's unexpected. Can you arrive Wednesday? The guest room on the 3rd floor will be yours. Mom and Dad get the main guest suite, of course." In the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, Grace called repeatedly with instructions and reminders that somehow always positioned me as incompetent. "Remember to book your flight soon before prices go up," she'd say, even though I'd booked it immediately. "Don't bring wine. Marcus has selected appropriate pairings," she'd instruct, though I hadn't mentioned bringing anything. "We're dressing for dinner on Thanksgiving. Business casual at minimum," she informed me, implying I'd otherwise show up in rags. My parents called too, their message clear, though less direct. "Grace has put so much effort into planning this, so please be on your best behavior. No controversial topics and try to show interest," Mom said. Dad chimed in. "And maybe get a haircut before you come." First impressions with Marcus's family matter. I hadn't seen them in 2 years, and their primary concern was me embarrassing them. My anxiety grew. I scheduled an extra session with Dr. Thompson, my therapist. "How do you want to handle the family dynamic this time?" she asked. "I'm tired of playing the role they've assigned me," I told her. "The underachieving son, the family disappointment. I don't want to pretend anymore." "Does that mean you'll tell them about your financial success?" she asked. "No," I said after a moment. "That feels like seeking validation through money, which isn't healthy. But I also won't diminish myself or my work to fit their narrative. I'll just be authentic and set boundaries." "That's significant progress, buddy," she noted, with an approving nod. When I arrived at Boston Logan Airport the day before Thanksgiving, the weather mirrored my mood. Gray, chilly, threatening rain. Their house was exactly what I expected. Sprawling colonial, perfect landscaping, circular driveway. Beautiful but sterile. Grace answered the door, perfectly coiffed, pearl earrings gleaming. "You made it," she said, giving me a quick, perfunctory hug before turning away. "Everyone's in the living room." She didn't offer to help with my luggage. The reunion with my parents was awkward formality. Mom rose to embrace me, immediately commenting on my hair and how thin I looked. Dad gave me his standard firm handshake and shoulder pat. Marcus played the gracious host. His parents, Gerald and Eleanor, observed with polite interest. Old Boston money, the kind that never needs to announce itself. "And what is it you do in California, Buddy?" Eleanor asked. Before I could answer, Grace jumped in. "Buddy works in computers. Some kind of programming thing, right?" She glanced at me with raised eyebrows. "I founded a cybersecurity company specializing in financial transaction protection," I replied evenly. "It was recently acquired by tech giant." "How interesting," Eleanor murmured, clearly not finding it interesting at all. The conversation immediately shifted to Grace's children and their private school achievements. The house tour followed, Grace narrating like a museum docent. "This is the formal dining room, with the chandelier we imported from Italy. The table seats 20 when fully extended. Each room came with a similar inventory of designer names, imported materials, subtle price signifiers. My parents got the spacious second-floor suite. My room was a converted attic space on the 3rd floor, small but functional, bathroom down the hall. It's usually the nanny's room, but she's away for the holiday weekend," Grace explained, not quite meeting my eyes. That evening, we gathered for a catered pre-Thanksgiving dinner. Conversation revolved around Grace's practice, Marcus's hospital politics, their children's achievements. When I mentioned a recent trip to Japan, Grace cut in. "Buddy, your sweater has a stain," she said, completely ignoring my travel story. "Why don't you borrow one of Marcus? You're about the same size, though he's more athletic build, of course." Mom nodded in agreement. "That would be nice of Marcus. You should look presentable for tomorrow when everyone's here." I glanced down at my perfectly clean cashmere sweater. "There's no stain, Grace. And I brought appropriate clothes for tomorrow. But thank you for your concern." A brief flash of annoyance crossed her face before she smiled tightly and turned to Marcus's father to discuss golf clubs. As I prepared for bed that night, listening to the murmur of voices from downstairs, I reflected on how little had changed. We had seamlessly resumed our familiar family script. The only difference? I was no longer willing to play my assigned role without question. Tomorrow would be Thanksgiving, and I had a feeling our family dynamic was about to face its greatest test yet. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold. I could hear caterers, Grace barking instructions, kids laughing. I took my time getting ready, steeling myself. By 10, the house was a Thanksgiving spectacle. Every surface draped in elegant, understated decorations. The dining room table, a masterpiece. Hand-calligraphed place cards, multiple crystal glasses, elaborate floral centerpieces. Grace was everywhere, orchestrating everyone like chess pieces. Mom, please help Eliza with her dress. Dad, entertain Marcus's parents. Buddy, just try not to get in the way. I found myself assigned child-wrangling duty, keeping Grace's 7-year-old twins, Eliza and Ethan, occupied. This suited me. They were the only family members genuinely happy to see me. Uncle Buddy, do you still make computers? Ethan asked as we built a block tower. Something like that, I replied, smiling at his simple understanding. Mom says you're not very good at it because you still have to work. Eliza informed me matter-of-factly. She says if you were successful, you'd have people working for you instead. I managed to keep my expression neutral. Is that so? Well, people measure success in different ways. As noon approached, more guests arrived. Marcus's brother, hospital colleagues, Marcus's elderly grandmother, wheeled in by a private nurse. Grace insisted on formal pre-dinner photos. Buddy, stand at the end here, she directed, positioning me at the far edge, partially hidden behind Marcus's brother. When the hired photographer suggested I move forward, she overruled him. No, the composition is better this way. Trust me. By the time we were called to dinner at 3 p.m., my shoulders were a tight knot of tension. We processed into the dining room in a rigid order of importance. Grace and Marcus led, then both sets of parents, then other guests. Me, bringing up the rear. The seating arrangement continued the theme. Grace and Marcus at opposite ends. My parents in positions of honor. I was wedged between Marcus's hard-of-hearing grandmother and a hospital colleague who'd already had several glasses of wine. Before the meal, Marcus stood for a toast to family, friends, abundance. Then, a Whittington family tradition, everyone shared something they were grateful for. Grace went first, naturally. What started as gratitude quickly became a highlight reel of her accomplishments. I'm thankful for my thriving practice, my recent appointment to the hospital board, the children's acceptance into the gifted program, and of course, our new summer home on Nantucket. My parents beamed. Mom's turn. She expressed gratitude for Grace and her family, with a brief, general mention of both my children, as an afterthought. The ritual moved around the table until it reached me. Eyes turned to me, mostly with polite disinterest. I'm grateful for the journey of the past few years, I said simply. For lessons learned, challenges overcome, and the freedom to create my own path. Grace gave a tight smile. How nice, very philosophical. Then she signaled the caterers to begin serving. The meal was flawless. Gourmet interpretations of traditional dishes. Wine flowed freely. Conversation drifted between safe topics, hospital gossip, private school comparisons, vacation properties. During the main course, Marcus began describing a major hospital acquisition his department was considering. The technology would revolutionize our cardiac imaging capabilities, he explained. The company's valuation is through the roof after their security division was acquired by tech giant last year. I paused mid-bite. I knew that company. Marcus continued, oblivious. The acquisition was one of the biggest in the financial security sector. Apparently, the founder was some young programming prodigy who developed an entirely new approach to transaction protection. What was the security company called? Gerald, Marcus's father, asked. Secure Transact, Marcus replied. Relatively unknown until tech giant paid $15 million for their technology and team. The wine glass slipped from Grace's hand, splashing red across the immaculate tablecloth. She barely noticed. Her wide eyes were fixed on me, connections visibly forming in her mind. Secure Transact, she repeated slowly. Buddy, isn't that? The table fell silent. All eyes shifted between Grace and me. I took a sip of water, oddly calm despite the sudden tension. Yes, I confirmed. That was my company. Marcus stared, his expression morphing from confusion to dawning comprehension. Wait, he said. You're that Buddy Mitchell? The founder of Secure Transact? The $15 million acquisition was your company. My parents looked completely lost. Dad's fork remained suspended midair, a piece of turkey trembling. I had no idea you were behind that. Marcus continued, genuine admiration in his voice. The security protocols your team developed are considered revolutionary in the industry. Grace's face had drained of color. $15 million, she whispered, then louder, her voice rising sharply. You sold your company for $15 million. Mom finally found her voice. Buddy, what is everyone talking about? What company? The cybersecurity company I founded 5 years ago, I explained calmly. Tech giant acquired it last year. For $15 million? Dad finally managed to ask, his voice barely a croak. Yes, I confirmed, meeting his stunned gaze directly. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft clink of Marcus's grandmother's spoon. Grace was the first to shatter it, her voice tight, hands trembling. This is a joke, right? Some kind of twisted prank. I shook my head. No joke. Secure Transact was my company. I founded it after college, built it for 5 years. But that's impossible, she insisted, looking around for allies. Buddy works at some little tech support job or something. He's not. He couldn't possibly. Marcus leaned forward, genuinely interested. The Secure Transact acquisition was major news in business circles. Their security protocol completely revolutionized how financial institutions handle online transactions. He turned to me with new respect. I had no idea that was your work. Mom's expression fluctuated between confusion and disbelief. But honey, why didn't you tell us? We're your family. Before I could answer, Grace's voice rose an octave. $15 million. $15 million. And you never said a word. While we've been feeling sorry for you all these years. No one asked. I replied simply. When we talked, which wasn't often, the conversation always centered around your accomplishments. There never seemed to be much interest in the details of my life. Grace pushed back from the table so forcefully that water glasses wobbled. That is completely unfair. We always asked how you were doing. You asked if I was still doing that computer thing, I corrected her. That's not the same as showing genuine interest. Dad finally spoke, a strained croak. Son, $15 million. Why would you keep that from us? Grace wasn't waiting for my answer. Her shock had transformed into indignation. This is so typical. You always had to make everything about you. Always playing the victim. The irony of her statement was so profound, I actually laughed, which only inflamed her further. You think this is funny? You've been lying to us for years, making us think you were struggling while secretly being a millionaire? Do you have any idea how that makes us look? How it makes you look? I repeated incredulously. That's your concern right now? Grace was pacing, her carefully planned dinner completely forgotten. I can't believe this. All this time we've been worried about you, thinking you couldn't afford nice things, offering to help you. When did you ever offer to help me? I interrupted, genuinely curious. Well, we would have, if we'd known you needed it, she sputtered. But apparently you were just playing poor while secretly being rich. What kind of person does that? Marcus's parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. The hospital colleagues suddenly became fascinated with their dessert plates. The private nurse quietly wheeled Marcus's grandmother from the room, sensing the family drama escalating. I never played anything, I said, keeping my voice level. I lived modestly because that's what I prefer. And I never told you about the acquisition because money has never been the measure of success in this family. Academic prestige, professional titles, those were what mattered. That's ridiculous. Mom interjected. We've always been proud of both our children equally. That statement was so divorced from reality, I couldn't let it pass. Mom, that's simply not true. My entire childhood was spent in Grace's shadow. My achievements were barely acknowledged, while hers were celebrated extravagantly. That is not true, Grace shouted, slamming her hand on the table. You were always the favorite. Mom and Dad bent over backward for you. Dad started to speak, then began coughing violently, reaching for his water glass. The confrontation had literally taken his breath away. Favorite, I repeated in disbelief. Grace, you had elaborate birthday parties while mine were afterthoughts. Your academic achievements were displayed prominently, while my sports trophies were shoved in a closet. They attended every one of your recitals, but missed my state championship soccer game. That's because my activities were important. Grace shot back. Academic and cultural pursuits matter for future success. Kicking a ball around a field doesn't. And yet, here we are, I replied quietly. Grace's face flushed deep red. You know what? I'm going to prove how wrong you are. She stormed out of the dining room, leaving everyone in uncomfortable silence. Mom attempted damage control. Buddy, I think you're remembering things through a very negative lens. We always treated you and Grace exactly the same. Did you help me with a down payment on a house? I asked. Mom fidgeted with her napkin. Well, no, but you never asked. Did you ever offer? She had no answer. Grace returned, clutching several photo albums, her expression triumphant. Let's see what the evidence says, shall we? She began flipping through pages aggressively. Look, here's your 10th birthday party, with that ridiculous dinosaur cake Mom made from scratch. Does that look like an afterthought to you? I leaned forward. In the photo, 10-year-old me stood awkwardly beside the cake, while 13-year-old Grace dominated the foreground, clearly annoyed at not being the center of attention. Grace, that's your dinosaur phase. That was your cake. My birthday was the following week, and I got a grocery store cake that just said happy birthday with no name because it was a last-minute purchase. She flipped to another page. Well, what about this? Dad, taking you fishing, just the two of you? I never got special trips like that. Dad had regained his composure. Grace, that was the one time I took him fishing, and only because you and your mother were at your piano competition in Springfield. As Grace continued flipping, a pattern emerged that was visible to everyone. Photo after photo showed family events centered around Grace's achievements, with me often literally in the background or margin. Holiday photos, Grace opening multiple presents, me with one or two. Vacation photos, Grace in the foreground at tourist attractions, me standing apart. The photographic evidence was doing the opposite of what Grace intended, providing visual confirmation of the family dynamic I had described. Marcus placed a gentle hand on Grace's arm. Honey, maybe we should take a break. She shook him off. No, I will not be painted as some spoiled princess when I worked incredibly hard for everything I achieved. She turned to me, eyes blazing. Why didn't you tell us about the money? Were you planning to just hoard it all to yourself while letting Mom and Dad help me with expenses all these years? And there it was, the real issue behind her anger. I never asked them to prioritize your needs over mine, I replied calmly. That was their choice. And I never needed their financial support because I built something successful on my own, without family connections or support. Grace's voice became dangerously quiet. So this is revenge? Making us all look foolish because you had some childhood grievances. It's not revenge, Grace. I just stopped seeking approval I was never going to get and focused on building my own life. Dad cleared his throat. Son, I think you're being a bit unfair. We always supported your interests. When did you ever show real interest or support for my work? I challenged him directly. You dismissed my early coding as playing video games. You called my decision to start a company risky and suggested I get a real job instead. You've never once asked me to explain what my company actually did or why it mattered. Dad opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, unable to provide a counterexample. Grace wasn't ready to concede. This is absurd. You're rewriting our entire family history because you have some weird inferiority complex. Just because you got lucky with some tech thing. It wasn't luck, Marcus interrupted, surprising everyone. I've read about secure transacts technology. It was genuinely innovative, revolutionary even. He turned to me with professional respect. The security protocols you developed solved problems that had plagued the industry for years. Grace shot her husband a betrayed look. Whose side are you on? I'm not taking sides, he replied carefully. I'm just stating facts about Buddy's professional accomplishments. The tension in the room was unbearable. Mom was quietly crying. Dad looked shell-shocked. Grace was practically vibrating with anger and embarrassment. Why are you doing this? She demanded, her voice breaking. Why ruin Thanksgiving with all this ancient history and resentment? I didn't bring it up, I reminded her gently. I've kept my success private precisely to avoid this kind of reaction. Marcus recognized my company's name by coincidence. So, you were never going to tell us? Mom asked, evident pain in her voice. Your own family? I looked at her directly. Would it have changed anything? Would knowing I had financial success suddenly make my path valid in your eyes? Because that's not how unconditional support is supposed to work. The silence that followed was profound. For perhaps the first time, my parents and sister were truly seeing me, not as the perpetual disappointment they'd categorized me as, but as an adult who had carved his own successful path, despite, not because of, his family background. Grace abruptly stood, tears streaming down her face. I need some air. She walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the wreckage of her perfect Thanksgiving dinner. The remaining guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Marcus's brother murmured something about checking on their car, and he and his wife made a discreet exit. The hospital colleagues followed shortly after, thanking Marcus with forced cheerfulness, as if they hadn't just witnessed an explosive family meltdown. In the sudden quiet of the nearly empty dining room, Dad attempted a weak justification. We always wanted what was best for both of you. Maybe we didn't always get it right. It was the closest thing to an admission I had ever heard from him. And despite everything, I felt a small spark of hope that perhaps, finally, something might change. The remainder of Thanksgiving evening passed in a blur of awkward silences and stilted attempts at normal conversation. Grace eventually returned, eyes red but composure regained, mechanically serving dessert as if following a script she couldn't abandon. The few guests who hadn't found excuses to leave ate pumpkin pie with forced enthusiasm, complimenting the catering while studiously avoiding any reference to the emotional explosion. As the evening wore on, I decided to leave rather than stay overnight. The third-floor guest room suddenly felt like a perfect metaphor for my position in the family, an afterthought, separate from the main household. I think it's best if I get a hotel room tonight, I announced quietly as the last guests were preparing to leave. Mom looked distressed. Buddy, that's not necessary. We're family. We can work through this. I know we can, I agreed, but not tonight. Everyone needs some space to process. As I packed my bag, Grace appeared in the doorway of the guest room. Her perfect hostess demeanor had crumbled, replaced by a conflicted expression. You're leaving? She stated flatly. Yes, I've called a car service. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed defensively. So that's it. Drop a bomb on the entire family, and then just leave. I didn't drop any bomb, Grace. Marcus recognized my company's name. That's all. She was quiet for a moment, then asked the question really on her mind. $15 million? That's really true. Yes. And you're just sitting on all that money while Mom and Dad help us with the kids' private school tuition and our house renovation? Even now, she was viewing my success primarily in terms of how it could benefit her. Some patterns run too deep to break in a single evening. My financial decisions are my own, Grace, just as Mom and Dad's decisions about supporting you are theirs. She stepped into the room, lowering her voice. We're planning to add a pool house next summer. Marcus's practice is doing well, but with the kids' tuition and the Nantucket property taxes. I stared at her in disbelief. Are you actually asking me for money right now? After everything that just happened? She had the grace to look momentarily embarrassed before recovering. We're family, buddy. Family helps each other. At least, most families do. I zipped my bag closed with finality. Good night, Grace. Thank you for dinner. As I headed downstairs, Marcus intercepted me in the foyer. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I've always accepted the family narrative about you without question. That was wrong of me. His sincerity surprised me. Thank you for saying that. For what it's worth, what you built with Secure Transact was extraordinary. The medical technology company that licensed your security protocols has transformed our cardiac care capabilities. For the first time that evening, I felt truly seen for my professional accomplishments, ironically, by my brother-in-law rather than my own parents. That means a lot, Marcus. Thank you. My rideshare arrived, saving us from further conversation. I stepped out into the cold November night, exhaling a breath I felt I'd been holding for years. In my hotel room, I sat by the window overlooking Boston's twinkling skyline, processing the day. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Grace, alternating between apologies and thinly veiled financial requests. I'm sorry things got heated. Family dynamics are complicated. Have you considered setting up college funds for your niece and nephew? I didn't mean what I said about you playing the victim. Our contractor mentioned the pool house would be a perfect tax write-off for someone in your position. I silenced the phone. The next morning, just after 7, my phone rang. It was Dad. Can we meet for coffee? He asked, his voice subdued. Just you and me. We met at a cafe. Dad was already there, looking older and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. Without Mom and Grace as a shield, something in his demeanor had shifted. I didn't sleep last night, he admitted. Kept thinking about things you said. Things I couldn't really argue with. I waited silently. I always thought we were good parents, he said, staring into his coffee cup. Thought we gave both our children what they needed. But looking at those photo albums last night, seeing it all laid out like that. His voice cracked slightly. We really did put Grace at the center of everything, didn't we? It was the first genuine acknowledgement I had ever received from him. Why? I asked simply. Why was there such a difference in how you treated us? Dad was quiet for a long moment. Grace was like us, he finally said. She followed the path we understood. Academic achievement, prestigious credentials, a professional career. When she succeeded, it validated our own life choices and values. He looked up at me then, truly looked at me. But you were different from the beginning. Creative, independent, interested in technology we didn't understand. Your path didn't fit our narrow definition of success. I guess we just didn't know how to support it. You could have tried, I said quietly. You could have asked questions, shown interest, attended my games. You're right, he admitted, tears forming in his eyes. And I can't go back and change that. But I am proud of what you've built, son. Not because of the money, but because you had the courage to follow your own path, even when we didn't understand it. My phone rang. Mom, asking where Dad had gone. I explained we were having coffee. She insisted on joining us. 30 minutes later, she arrived, breathless and defensive. Richard has been telling me about your conversation. She began without preamble. And I think you're being very unfair. We always loved both our children equally. Love isn't the issue, Mom, I replied gently. It's about recognition, support, and validation. It's about showing up for soccer games, not just piano recitals. We were busy, working parents, doing our best, she insisted. If we focused more attention on Grace sometimes, it was because she needed more guidance. Dad surprised me by intervening. Carol, that's not entirely true, and you know it. We prioritized Grace because her achievements made us look good as parents. We understood her path. Buddies was foreign to us, so we minimized it. Mom's eyes widened at Dad's candor. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, he was contradicting her version of our family narrative. The conversation that followed was difficult, emotional, and long overdue. Mom initially remained defensive, but as Dad continued acknowledging specific instances of favoritism, her certainty began to crack. I never realized how it must have looked through your eyes, she finally admitted. We didn't mean to make you feel less important. Impact matters more than intent, I replied, a phrase Dr. Thompson had often used. By the time we parted that afternoon, something fundamental had shifted. No single conversation could heal decades of imbalance, but acknowledgement was a crucial first step. 3 months later, the changes in our family dynamic were subtle but significant. My parents called more frequently, asking specific questions about my work and life. Dad had even taken an online course about cybersecurity to better understand my field. Grace struggled the most. Her identity had been built around being the family star, and adjusting to a more equal relationship proved challenging. Her financial hints continued occasionally, but with decreasing frequency as she realized I wasn't going to be her personal banker. For my part, I established clearer boundaries while remaining open to a healthier connection. I used a portion of my wealth to establish a scholarship fund for overlooked students with an aptitude for technology, trying to create the support system I had lacked. One Tuesday afternoon, I met with the first recipient, a brilliant 16-year-old named Jamal, who powerfully reminded me of my younger self. As he excitedly described his plans for developing accessible technology for disabled users, I saw in him the same passion and vision that had driven me. My parents want me to be a doctor, he confided. They don't really get what I'm trying to build. Keep building anyway, I told him. Sometimes the people closest to us are the last to recognize our true path. That doesn't make the path any less valid. The real measure of success, I had learned, wasn't financial achievement or family validation. It was the freedom to define and pursue your own purpose. Money hadn't healed my family wounds, but honesty and boundaries had begun the process. As I watched Jamal leave, brimming with ideas and potential, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for decades. The overlooked son had finally found his voice, not through revenge or resentment, but through creating something meaningful from the very qualities his family had failed to value. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family or had your achievements overlooked while others were celebrated, share your story in the comments below. How did you find your own path to validation and success? Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving others wrong, but finding happiness on your own terms. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Remember, the approval that matters most is the kind you give yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to follow your own path, even when those around you don't understand it.